Hey, good afternoon or good morning, depending on what coast you're on. Welcome to our webcast, the 5 project management trends to make 2018 an awesome year. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items I want to go over. Rich and I are going to be answering all your questions, so we want you to be sure and put them in the Q&A console. We'll answer them during the webcast, or we'll get to all the ones that we can answer at the end, time permitting. If we can't get to them, then Rich and I will send you a personal email. Also, throughout this webcast, we have several poll questions, and we really want you to participate in that if possible, so that one, we understand our audience better, but also that helps us understand the people that are attending our webcast and helps us create useful content for the future. Also, you're going to get this deck as well as the link to the video within 48 hours. So let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Kim Coster, and I specialize in project management. My experience has been 21 years in government contracting, where I held jobs such as the controller of the Javelin joint venture. I was a product line business manager. I was an EV focal point. So really did a lot of different things within those government contractors. I also spent the last 8 years working for software companies that are project oriented. So over the years, I've gotten the opportunity to see many successful projects and some that weren't so successful. And I look forward to sharing some insights that I've learned over the years with you today. So Rich Wilkinson is also joining me. So Rich, can you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. I've been around the GovCon world for way too long. I've spent 8 years as a contracting officer with the Navy at the Naval Air Systems Command, mostly in anti-submarine warfare, and then worked my way through government contractors over a 10-year period installing accounting systems for them, and then spent about 15 years with a different software company, helping them keep compliant with the regulations. In fact, for the last 5 years or so, I was their VP for government contracting. But I got to Unanet as quickly as I could because I fell in love with their concept here of one database, one application, one security model, one technology stack. And I'm having the time of my life with this product line.
All right. Well, great. Thanks, Rich. Okay, so let's dive into the 5 trends here. Okay, so if you're on this webcast, most likely projects are the lifeblood of your organization. So executing projects is how you generate your revenue, your profit, and hopefully your growth. So successful, and I'm going to say successful execution, but I'm also going to say predictable execution. Okay, it's going to help you financially, but it's also going to help you win new business. It's going to have you better relationships with your customers as well as your subcontractors, and it's going to give you that competitive advantage. It's going to set you apart from your competitors so that you're going to be that go-to organization for your customer. Now, we're going to start off with a poll. I told you we were going to have several, and we're going to start off so that Rich and I will be able to tailor some of the information that we discuss based on your biggest challenges. So we'd love for you to answer, what are your biggest project management challenges? Is it A, forecasting, B, resource management, C, inexperienced project managers, or D, poor scope definition? And Rich, I am betting that based on the time of year that we're at, where everybody's going in and trying to set up their budgets and look at their annual operating plans and things like that, that the #1 challenge is going to be forecasting.
Probably. Resource management rears its ugly head this time of year as well, but the scope definition thing, not so much, because the government tends to buy stuff by telling you what they want done, not what they want the outcome to be, unfortunately.
Well, you know,
Kim,
what's interesting is...
You had a good guess right there, Kim. So we ended up at 49% forecasting, 19% said resource management, 27% said inexperienced project managers, and about 5% said poor scope.
You know, I've done several surveys over the years, and, you know, it's always surprised me that a lot of times the #1 issue was inexperienced project managers. So, and that was actually over forecasting. But I just thought since it was the time of the year that's probably where we would be. Okay, so I pulled this chart from the PMI's Pulse of the Profession, and this one was from 2016. And it really has some statistics for execution. And most of the areas, as you can see, they stayed flat. So nothing really got too much better or too much worse. It was about a 1 or 2% delta from 2012 to 2016. But for me, one of the most interesting things is that on budget and on time, they got worse. And to me, those are just really the basics of project management. So in my mind, there's really plenty of room for you to set yourself apart with successful and predictable execution, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. And so, Rich, you've been out in the industry. You're meeting with a lot of customers, a lot of project-based organizations right now. Is there anything that you're seeing from an execution stats perspective that you want to share with our audience?
Well, I'm a little surprised, frankly, at this stuff. I would have thought things were changing more. If I understand the context of this graphic correctly, it's telling us that certain aspects of project management are changing over time, but actually very little. Mm-hmm. Am I reading this right?
That's correct.
The one thing that I've seen change over time with respect to project management is the time scale. And maybe I'm just not, maybe I'm going back too far, and because my memory goes back significantly further than 2012, but we used to plan projects and contracts over a year with maybe a couple years of options, sometimes 4 or 5 years of options. And now it seems like we live on 90-day delivery orders. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times, at least my clients are finding that by the time they're well into the job, the delivery order is almost over. And the time scale is really giving them problems, because we used to have 3, 4, 5 months to get our feet on the ground, 2 years of running room, plenty of time to correct if we were off course. Now it seems like just about the time we get the first job status report, the job's half over. I guess I'm surprised.
Yeah, and that makes it hard to really improve these, doesn't it?
More than this graph would lead us to believe.
Yeah, it'll be interesting as we pulse the audience, what some of their thoughts are here. And, feel free inside the question console to write us any of your experiences that you want to share with us here about your execution and things that might have gotten better in your business. So today, the 5 trends that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to just quickly go over them, but Rich and I are going to delve into each one of them separately. But what we're seeing from a trend for 2018 is we see an increasing importance in the project management office. Also, the second one is people who are creating resource management practices and disciplines are succeeding more. That's something that is very important especially for professional services organizations. We also see the need to, and we also are seeing a growing investment in project managers, as well as the project management discipline overall, and all the other project team members, so not just the project managers themselves. We're also seeing companies that are successful pick key performance indices that are really helping them drive their business. So those are our main 5 trends that we're going to be talking about today. So the first one is about the PMO. So the question really is, why have a PMO? And it'd be interesting, we'll talk to you guys in a minute, and we'll ask a poll of who has a PMO or who doesn't have a PMO and what kind. But, why would you have a PMO? The reason you would have it is because it really is the backbone of successful project management, the discipline overall, and the approach that your business is going to take. There's really 2 different kinds, in my mind. One's centralized and one's decentralized. So the centralized is really an enterprise-wide PMO that services all the different projects within the organization. A decentralized PMO is something that's established or centered around a project or a program. So regardless, though, of what type of PMO that you have, whether it's centralized or decentralized, that PMO really is a support function, and it provides help for project managers to make decisions. One key thing that I want to point out is the project management office itself does not make program management decisions themselves, okay? They are the primary enabler for project execution, so they should be helping project managers and project teams successfully and predictably execute projects. Now, as you look in the chart above, you can see here, let me get my mouse, you can see from 2007 for 2017 that we're starting to see organizations really pick up and put PMOs back on the map. Now, I've been around for a long time also, since the late 80s, and, I've seen the PMO trend come and go. The main thing is that, in my younger years, the PMO was a great enabler. It provided a tremendous amount of value. They were seen as the subject matter experts for project management. So I'm really glad to see that that PMO trend is back on the rise, and that more companies and organizations are recognizing the need for the PMO. Now, the one other thing that's interesting about this report is it says that, and it's this little statistic over here in the corner, of the folks that have a PMO in this survey, half report having an enterprise-wide PMO. And those that align their enterprise PMO to strategy, to their strategic objectives, 38% more projects meet the original goals and business intent, and 33% fewer projects are deemed failures. So to me, that is a pretty good reason to go off and look at either reviving the PMO if you have one that's been established and it's not effective, or really starting a PMO from scratch. Now, the one thing that you don't want is people saying things about your PMO, and I hope that they're not saying things like, please more output from your PMO. The one thing is that, do you know what people are saying about your PMO? Have you asked them? Do you have an idea of how they think of it? Is that PMO really providing the value that it needs to? So what we're going to be giving you here over the next couple of charts are really some tips that are going to help you either revive your PMO or start to think about setting up a new one. Now, again, Rich, you're seeing a lot of different project-based organizations. Do you have anything here about what you think people are saying about the PMO these days?
Yeah, your number one up there is, in fact, the number one thing I hear. The PMO is an overhead function. And when I hear that, it's not necessarily a good thing, because 9 times out of 10, when I talk to a services organization, their number one criteria for whether a cost is good or not is, can I recover it from my customer? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, if the PMO is centralized, it means that the customer is probably not paying for it. It is, in fact, an overhead function. Now, that extra word in there, just an overhead function, that puts that comment in a different light. And the PMO shouldn't be just an overhead function, but in your experience, how do we get the customer to pay for that PMO without embedding it in our rates? Because nobody wants the rates to go up.
Well, a lot of times, in my experience, we were able to bid the project management function within the proposal, and then use that and bid the PMO as a part of that contract, and that worked well, especially for the larger projects that I was on over my life here. So that's how we actually did it. We were able then to charge that back.
Well, what I'm hearing is that PMO has to be a strategy, something that's long-term and put in place well before the contract starts, and not strategic or not tactical or reaction to a problem.
Right. Exactly. And that does cause a problem, getting it really to really be functional over time. But like I said, in my experience, that's what we had, and we staffed that. That's one thing we're going to talk about too. We staffed that with very experienced people, and took the policies and procedures and things from other projects forward into this other PMO, into the new decentralized PMO also, that we were able to charge off. Anything else in that, Rich, you want to chat about?
Well, in my discussions, especially here recently with companies that are moving into an active project management phase of their growth, and by that I mean they're seeing project management as a discipline that's just as important as their boots on the ground performers. They're interested in bringing junior project managers along, teaching them the discipline, things like that. And they see that as a PMO function. Are you seeing that in the people you talk to?
Absolutely not. The folks that I'm chatting with and there have been a little larger type companies, Rich, but they're more interested in making sure they have those experienced project managers. And so I think there was a very long time period where I saw people hiring those junior project managers and then trying to bring them along into the PMO. And now we're seeing that the trend I'm seeing, like I said, in larger companies, is that PMO is staffed with experienced people.
But do you see the PMO as having an education or a person development function?
Yes, yes.
In addition to
and that has to be an experienced person.
Yeah. That's what I hear people, the boots on the ground, asking for is out of their PMO, give us training, give us education, teach us to be project managers.
And, I think that there is a education factor, but I'm not sure that that's all, to teach a PMO to teach you how to be a project manager. I'm not sure that that's exactly what the PMO is established for. And, we're going to talk about that in our fourth trend and, really be talking about, setting up that project manager, training, discipline, competencies within the organization. And I think that should actually be, unless it's a centralized PMO from a very large company, I think that, that training, et cetera, may belong to another organization, not necessarily the PMO itself. So, I think we've got a lot of different folks with a lot of different development, in a lot of different development phases that they're walking through at this point.
And that's one of the things I'm hearing too, is that we really can't afford for our PMOs to be trainers. Because they can't afford more of that overhead function. They need it to happen inside the project. And we'll talk a little more about that later. But part of that is giving them tools to work with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to move on here to, these are the tips that Rich and I have come up with to help you either revive your PMO or to start a PMO. So the first one is to ask the project stakeholders, what they need to be successful. A lot were just, set up and they were done in a vacuum, but really didn't get buy-in for the policies and the procedures, making sure that the project managers and all the project stakeholders had what they needed. So, that's a very important part of this process. The second tip is to revisit that PMO charter and your vision. The other thing, too, is make sure that you are communicating that charter and that vision and that you're aligning it with what the project teams are telling you that they need. Again, very important that you do that in order for them to want to utilize the PMO. The other thing is relook at those policies and procedures and update them as you need to, and again, take into account what those stakeholders are telling you they need in order to be successful. Now, one of our tips that we just talked about was creating a resource management practice, but that's also a tip for and a step for having a successful PMO, making sure that your resource practice is not just something that you have off over in the corner. You really need to actively manage those resources in order to have an effective PMO. And that will set your PMO apart from other organizations. Because when we talk about resource management, you'll find that people aren't necessarily doing that in a regimented and disciplined way. The next thing we're going to do is we want to assess the skills of the project teams and course correct. Too many times over my life experience, I watched us, and I'm going to give you an example. I watched us take somebody from, say, Tech Pubs and try to make them into a financial analyst. And the reality is those folks didn't necessarily have an aptitude for numbers. So we want to make sure that we have the right people in the right jobs with the right training. I think that's extremely important. Also, number 6 is, and this is another one of our 5 trends, but it's a huge tip for making sure you have an effective PMO, is developing those common project and portfolio KPIs. Everybody should be tracking things like utilization in a professional services organization and margin. So we want everybody tracking those in a centralized place that are real time and you may have some specific project things that you want to track, KPIs that you want to track, and allow for both of those. So have some that everybody's marching to, and some that maybe the project wants for their own. So having that is key. And I said something too that is really key, and that is that it's real time. You don't want those KPIs to be 2, 3, 4 weeks old when you're looking at that information and the data that's actually used to calculate those KPIs. The other thing is to make sure that you have aligned with your corporate and your organizational goals. So, you know, if your organizational goals, say, are for delivering projects on time, you know, you want to make sure that your policies and procedures are in line with enabling on-time delivery, and that you have metrics that are tracking that so that you can make changes real time so that you can more meet that metric that KPI that you're looking for, and ultimately meet your organizational goal. And then you also want to provide teams with a toolkit for success. So, Rich, I think you had some things you wanted to add to that and elaborate on. So I'll give you your time.
Yeah, in several different places, actually.
I know.
I love this chart, but number 6 ought to have on the end of that statement, see number 1 and number 3. KPIs are wonderful.
Exactly.
And boy, I've lived and died by them in my career. And I've calculated more than a few million of them. But I've also found more than a few times that I was calculating KPIs that nobody cared about. So it makes sense to ask the project stakeholders frequently, are these KPIs helping you be successful? Because if they're not, probably a waste of time. There may be other things that would be more useful. And number 3, relook at the policies and procedures and course correct, update. Maybe there's a different KPI that makes more sense, and keep refining those things. Over time, those KPIs should be incredibly useful. But if you're not careful, those KPIs can just become rote. We calculate this because it's our policy to calculate this, when we really ought to be calculating a KPI because it's useful. It makes us more successful or helps us be successful. And then number 8 down there, that toolkit, man, is that important. And the toolkit needs to be widely available. And again, I'm going to talk about this a little more when we actually take a look at some of the tools we provide to our clients. But I see so often project managers using other software tools from other companies that say, I would really like to bring my protege along, but we can't afford another seat of the project management module. Or it would cost too much for them to have that access. And so I end up having to do that myself. Or I have to export it and give it to them in a spreadsheet. And they have to do it in a spreadsheet because we can't give them access in the system. Those toolkits need to be not just useful, but broadly available to all the people that you want to have access to them. Otherwise,
absolutely.
The best tool in the world that lays in the toolbox is no good to anybody.
Absolutely. Okay, so I hope those tips helped either get started. We also had, maybe it was, I think in December, we also did a detailed webcast on how to revive your PMO, and you'd be able to get that out on demand on unanet.com. And it delves into each one of these in a whole lot more detail, and talks, like I said, a whole lot more detail in each one. Okay, we get to our next poll, and our next poll is, what PMO structure are you currently utilizing? Centralized, decentralized, or no PMO? And Mr. Rich, I think that we are going to see more decentralized PMOs starting up.
So we're going to handicap this
getting
race.
Going again.
I think we're going to see a lot more decentralized PMOs than we are centralized. Yep. And for no other reason than the one I said early on, services firms live and die by being billable. And
Yep.
centralized PMOs are really hard to bill out to customers.
Now, do you think we're going to see a lot of no PMO?
You know, I think most companies say they have a PMO today, even if it's mostly a policy as opposed to an actual practice. We'll see.
So
Okay,
Kim,
so Jess, you got them?
Both are in.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, we have 29% centralized, 26% decentralized, and then 46% said no PMO.
Wow, that is interesting. That is interesting. So hopefully, Rich, we during the webcast we'll come up with some tips for folks to help justify a PMO, or get them thinking a PMO might be a good thing to begin utilizing within their organization.
Now let me ask you something, Kim. You and I both know that KPIs are being calculated in almost all of those companies. Somewhere.
Yes.
They might not be consistent. They might not be the same across all the projects. They might not be useful. But if the people that are doing those are not called a PMO, what are they? Are the project managers each doing their own thing?
I've been out in several companies over the last couple of years, and there was one I went out, and each one, they had like, each product had like almost like a product line of projects, and each one of those did them separately, and amazingly enough, they did them separately in Excel. And there was nothing that joined all that information back together. And this was a fairly large, well-known company. And I saw that in multiple different places. And and the problem, Rich, is that people don't have that centralized information in order to get those KPIs out or to have an effective PMO. I think that's really important.
I've seen some of the same
you were
thing
emphasizing you're emphasizing the tool, and I think you're exactly correct. And having that widely spread so that everybody can use it. And what was interesting about that company too was they didn't want to make a change. Everything worked, and so they didn't want to make that change. It was too painful.
Well, that's one of the primary rules we see, especially in defense contracting, is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Unfortunately, some of the things that we think aren't broke really are.
I know. And so, you wonder, it's not that they weren't successful. The company was successful, but you wonder how much profit and margin they were leaving on the table, how much more successful they could have been if they had looked to mature themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to our second trend, and that was managing resources. So, it's really amazing to me. Many companies that I've run across over the years, they really don't manage their resources. And what's even more incredible to me is that those are professional services organizations, a lot of them, where they're using labor to, generate the majority of their revenue. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tips for really setting up that project, that resource management practice, and it will help you. These tips will really help you with your overall performance over your projects. So the first one is, have that centralized repository for all your resource plans that all stakeholders can access. I mean, that's huge, that all resource plans are accessible. You want to make sure that everybody is in that, everybody can see it, and that everybody knows whether Rich is available or whether Rich is not available. Okay, so you don't want to be having that guess. The next thing is you want to have a skills catalog with the right resources so that you're able to see when they're needed. And you might not just want to have what you need from a current perspective, but out in your proposals, if you know that you're going to need some specialty engineering or some other specialty skill, you may want to make sure that you're looking at that catalog and communicating very quickly with that resource manager to make sure that that skill is available so that HR can get out there and hire that skill set for you. The third tip would be to make sure that you're forecasting resources throughout the project life cycle. So when we talk about that, when you're putting your proposal together, you want to be looking at the resources and the skill sets that you need at that point. Then you want to go back and of course correct that then for negotiations, whatever negotiation changes you've had, and then you'll initiate your project, okay? And then you'll be looking at all your resources, and then you'll need to continue to update that resource plan through execution through your ETCs. So it's very important that you don't just do it one time and make it static. Those resources are going to be changing continually. The fourth tip would be then to have a single pool of resources across your company. So again, making sure if you have them siloed with you know, what we were just talking about, where you have them in Excel, project by project or program by program, you don't know whether Rich is available or not. You have no idea to be able to see whether he's there and available for you to use or not. You also want to, the fifth tip would be to plan at the project level and then roll that up to the enterprise. You know, in my experience, I would not necessarily start my forecast by the department, but you do need a tool that allows you to be able to roll that forecast back by department. So, you know, I may want to look at all the different projects, having them forecast, but I also want to be able to see in my functional groups how many people that I need, because typically in a matrix organization, that functional group is the one who's actually responsible for the hiring and making sure that the right skills are in the right place at the right time. You know, we talked about KPIs, and again, we want to make sure that we have real-time resource demand KPIs that are available to all the stakeholders who are participating in that process. And you know, the one thing that's real time is really important, because you don't want to be looking at data that's 2 or 3 weeks old. You know, Rich mentioned very short burn projects. You know, if you have a month-old data, your project may be over by then at the point that you are seeing that information. So being able to see it real time is important. And the seventh tip that I would have is to make sure that you're planning your resources in a tool. And I'm going to say like Unanet, because Rich and I both work for Unanet, and it is an awesome tool. But I wouldn't plan my most important assets in disparate Excel spreadsheets across the enterprise. So, Rich, anything here from a resource management perspective that you want to add?
Well, let's talk about trends a little bit. 25 years ago, matrix organizations were the rage. And I saw a significant trend away from that, especially right after Y2K. And I don't think that's related, but I saw a trend toward more line-oriented organizations and management by staffing projects, hiring people for projects, and maybe even laying them off when the project was over. But over the last 5 to 10 years, especially, I've seen a significant trend back toward matrix management, toward discipline management, where disciplines like electrical engineering or curriculum development are managed as a discipline across many projects. And then it becomes really critical to be able to see those resources, see the availability, see the utilization, and correct in near real time when resources go to the bench, when resources are not being fully utilized, and redistribute those resources. I think that we're seeing almost an end to the days of hiring for the project and laying off when the project's over, project-specific staffing, and back toward managing disciplines and matrix management of personnel resources in particular across a lot of projects.
I agree with you. I think that is very true. Okay, so that comes on to our next poll question. Okay, so, all right, how would you rate the maturity of your resource management discipline? A, very immature, B, somewhat immature, C, somewhat mature, or D, mature? So I would imagine, you know, just overall in general, Rich, I just haven't seen very many very mature organizations with the resource management discipline yet. I've seen some that were somewhat mature, but that's been few and far between, quite frankly. Most of them are somewhat immature. They're doing it, but they're not doing it in a very structured way.
Well, Kim, you and I have been in some of the same places and the same companies over the last 20 years. And you know as well as I do that the maturity of that discipline is highly dependent on the tools available to do it with. It's very difficult to have a mature resource management discipline if you don't have effective tools for resource management. And some of the stuff you and I have worked with over the last 10 or 15 years is not really susceptible to effective resource management. That's where
I agree.
think
When
the
they're
tools
disparate,
really kick in.
Yeah, when they're disparate and you've got to connect them and they're not real time, it's very hard to manage your resources.
You know, Excel is a wonderful tool, but it's very expensive, especially in matrix management organizations, because nobody can see my spreadsheet but me. And if you've ever had to follow up and debug somebody else's spreadsheet, you know it's nigh on impossible.
Exactly. Okay, Jess, tell us the results.
So, Kim, we're at 19% for very immature, 44% for somewhat immature, 34% for somewhat mature, and then only 3% as mature.
Okay, so just about what we expected. Yep.
I think this is very telling, though, that almost 2/3 of our respondents said that they were either very immature or somewhat immature, definitely immature. And I'm going to lay that right at the feet of tool availability.
Yep, I agree. Because I think everybody realizes that they need to manage those resources. And, you know, they're just, you know, over the years, again, it has been sitting in on a single computer back in a silo, and that's how resource management has been typically done for the majority of companies I've seen. So it's good that we do see some that are mature and some that are just somewhat immature. So we're seeing some progress, and again, making that change and really concentrating on a resource management practice really will help set you apart. You can even see from this survey internally here. Okay. So let's move on to our third trend, and that's collaboration. So, I've said this over the years, and, projects in of themselves are social. And, that took me a while. I have to really let that soak in, because I think of social as parties and things like that. But, the reality is, from a project perspective, there has to be constant and continuous interaction between those functional groups, the matrix organizations we're talking about, the project personnel, you've got executive management, you've got subcontractors, and you've got customers, okay? And so all of those people have to be interacted with and communicated with. Now, if projects just in themselves are social, the overall business needs to recognize those social needs. And they need to provide then all the stakeholders for the project a way to communicate and facilitate a culture of collaboration. Now, one way to do that is to establish a business cadence. And that business cadence really, it forces, I think I'm going to say forces, but I'm going to say it lighter, encourages collaboration. Now, ultimately, this becomes a calendar of events, and things are going to happen on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, bi-yearly or yearly basis. Now, a great example of having that business cadence is having a weekly meeting with the resource manager and the project manager to establish the needs. So that's a great way to do it. So, but several years ago, I went to a conference, and in that conference, this guy got up there, and he was going to talk about business cadence, and I saw chart 1 of 1, and it was a calendar. And I thought, ooh, boy, this is going to take us about 5 minutes, and I'm going to get to go have some coffee. I'll be hanging out at Starbucks here pretty quick. The reality is, he took that one chart, which just looked like a calendar of events, and he talked to us about how those teams interacted and communicated with each other in each one of those events or activities or meetings. And what happened with them was that it fostered then this constant communication. And so they had a risk management every Friday. That risk management became the place where everybody had an open dialogue. They had created a risk culture where everybody could openly talk about it. They did that same thing for all the different activities that they were going, and it just became a part of the culture. People got used to communicating with each other, and through that communication, they were able to share not just good news, but they were also able to share bad news and then help course correct. And, that culture just really worked very well. So what I thought was going to be 5 minutes ended up being, we were actually staying about 5 or 10 minutes over. So I think, again, the business cadence is really a set of interaction between the different teams, and both internal and as well as external. So Rich, why don't you talk a little bit about how you think tools can help you collaborate?
Well, first of all, there are tools and there are tools. In order to be useful, a tool has to do something you need done. It has to be available to all the people that can make use of it. And it has to give you access that's near real time. Last month's data 2 weeks from now doesn't do me any good. When you get right down to it, project managers are pretty simple people. They only have one question in the front of their minds all the time. Where am I? You talk to any project manager, and that's their first question, where am I? And a project manager that knows where they are once a month as of 2 weeks ago is flying blind. They're driving 90 miles an hour in fog backwards, looking in the rearview mirror. So the tool has to be near real time. It has to give them data they can use, data that's actually useful, and it has to be available to everybody that can make use of it. And this is probably as important as any of the rest of the stuff. It has to be the same tool and the same data for everybody. It doesn't do me any good if the view I'm getting is as of a week ago in a spreadsheet, and the view you're getting is online as of 2 weeks ago, and the view somebody else is getting is up to date, but it's a paper report. That's not a useful tool. Everybody needs to be working, singing off the same sheet of music, as it were. They need to have access to the same tool.
Exactly.
Other than that, I have no opinions at all.
Imagine that. Okay, all right. So let's move to the fourth trend. And that fourth trend that we're seeing is really increased investment in project managers and in the project management discipline overall. With there was a lot of uncertainty over the last several years, and spending started to be restricted. And we saw a lot of people cut off training and other things that they saw were extraneous or overhead functions. Now we've seen the economy improve, and if you're a government contractor and you're on this webcast, then we started to see some stabilization in the government funds, and so everybody's starting to really loosen their belts. So project management training becomes very necessary, and training your project managers in the discipline is very important. Some of it is a learned skill. Some of it's natural, and some of it's a learned skill. But the more that your project managers understand their overall roles, there's less likelihood of having issues with the project, and you're going to have a lot better outcomes in the future as long as the project managers understand what they're supposed to do. One thing that organizations should invest in is, again, project management training, but they also should take the time and figure out what a career path looks like for their project managers. They need to be able to have a path that moves them forward. And then you also need to be able to establish formal processes to help project managers improve their competencies. So, are you looking at maybe getting a PMP, a different certification, things like that. And people who do those things, who provide the training, have formal processes, provide career paths, they are going to do better from a project management perspective than those that don't. So I don't want you to forget, I mentioned earlier that, there's some other people on the project team besides just the project manager. There's business analysts, there's schedulers, there's that resource planner, there may be control account managers or work package managers, and they need training too. So some options that I've seen over the years are role-based training that we internally develop, where you're training on your tools. You can't just hand somebody a tool and say, hey, go run it. You really need to give them some training so that they'll maximize the use of that tool. And the same with policies and procedures. Help people understand why you're doing something and what they're doing that for. The other thing too is to make sure you offer certifications, and we're going to have a poll on that in a minute. But there's certifications like PMP or EVMP, and maybe I've been in some larger organizations that had their own certifications. So, maybe those are important to you, or a way to help incentivize, folks to come and work for you. Tell your project managers that you'll pay for those certifications or that you have them. The other thing that's important is coaching and mentoring and 360 feedback. That's always very helpful. It helps project managers understand how they can better help their teams. And, I think that having positive feedback is a great way to help improve your skills. The other kind of training that's important, I believe, is leadership training. And, I used to work for Raytheon, and I think they just did an excellent job recognizing that. We had training like Arbinger training, that really helped us understand people. We had internal training. It was something that they valued, and, that was evident because they continued to invest in making sure that the leaders of their organization were well equipped to lead. Because, some of that is just inherent. People are leaders, and some of that becomes learned, or it gives you tips or new ways to think about things. So again, I think it's time to take some of that money and make those investments, and I think that you'll see your project management success improve. So anything on that, Rich, as far as growing your project management team, investing in them?
No, you know what? I'm going to talk about that in a minute or two when I get to show a little bit about Unanet's tool.
Okay, I'm going to move then to, we have a quick poll. What percentages of your project managers have a PMP certification? So A is 0 to 25, B is 26 to 50, C 51 to 75, or D 76 to 100% of them. And I'm going to guess, Rich, it's C, that people are still investing in that and see some value in the PMP.
51 to 75?
That's my guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess 25 to 50. Yeah.
Okay.
For one thing, I have seen a distinct decrease in solicitation provisions demanding PMPs in key positions. Used to see that all the time. You had to have one to play.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So you're seeing that stop a little bit?
Yeah, and I don't think that's a good trend, but I've definitely seen it over the last, look at those numbers.
And I can't see them. Y'all tell me what they are.
60%, 0 to 25%, 17%, 26 to 50, 13%, 51 to 75, and then about 10% over 76%.
What that says,
well,
Kim, is 3/4 of our respondents have less than half of their project managers with a PMP certification. And 60%
so that'll be interesting.
Below 25%.
Yep, that's interesting. That's the lowest I've ever seen from a group of folks. So that's interesting. Either they have got great project managers and don't see the value in it, or it's something that they could look to improve by maybe getting a couple of their project managers PMP certifications. Okay, so what I'm going to do, Rich, is going to run through this fifth really quick because Rich and I tend to talk a lot, and so we're running a touch bit late. So, our fifth trend is when I say KPIs for everybody. And there's just a couple of things I'm going to point out on this, and I'm going to turn it over to Rich because he's going to do a demo of KPIs and some reporting and dashboards and things. But, we talked a little bit, KPI multiplying. You want to avoid that. You may need 2 to drive your corporate goals. And if 2 drives your corporate goals, don't pick 20 just because. One of the other things that's really important is to make sure that the data quality that's underneath is good. Otherwise, all of those calculations will be wrong, and your decision making will also be wrong. If you get the right answer, it'll be out of luck, not that you're using quantitative information to drive your decision processes. The other thing, I'll point out 2 more of them. The other thing is making sure that the person who's responsible from the KPI has direct control over the results. So I'm thinking that somebody in accounting shouldn't necessarily be responsible for the scheduled performance indice of a project, reporting it but not responsible for it. And one other thing here that I'll point out is that benchmarking, and I just want to point that out because Unanet has recently done with Kohn-Resnick a great benchmarking survey and a report, and it's a great tool for you to be able to use externally. It's called The Gauge, G-A-U-G-E, And you know, it's got some great information, like and by company size, it'll tell you what people's overhead rates look like, their G&A fringe, and then you can compare yourself within the size of company to what we're seeing in the industry. So a great way to really understand what you want to look at and how you are performing against those indices. Okay, so now what we're going to do is ask one more quick poll question, and we're going to ask you to rate the level of visibility and control over your projects: high, medium, or low. And Rich, I think it's going to be low.
I'm not going to handicap this one. I don't want to be right.
I think it's going to be low. I think it's going to be low, and I think most people, you know, what we thought of visibility changed over the years. You know, we wanted it to be. I used to think visibility was a report. Now I want to be able to see that information instantly. So I think it's going to be low.
Well, you blew that one, and I'm glad.
Dadgummit. So Kim, we're at 39% said high. Another 39% said medium, and then 23% said low. So that's good.
Hey, that's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to you, Rich, for a quick demo. I should have turned that over to you now.
It's not letting me take the presenter role. Did you make me the presenter, Kim?
I did. I did. And it's showing you as presenter, Rich. So
it is?
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing my screen?
Nope.
I didn't think so.
Nope, I'm still seeing the poll.
Do we need to exit the poll?
There you go. There you go.
There we go.
Live and learn, right?
Now, do you see my screen?
I do. Good job.
Well, as usually happens in these webinars, we've talked and talked and talked, and now I have about 1 minute and 30 seconds to show a software product that needs a 2-day demo. But I will point out a few quick things. This is our home screen, and a lot of the things you see here are available in other software products as very expensive add-ons, but this is Unanet. This is our default presentation. Now, you can certainly see a lot of these graphs, or a few of these graphs. It's completely customizable, but I'll show you one in particular. You see this one where my cursor is here, it says hours performance. This is a burn rate graph. And here's that same burn rate graph blown up a little bit. This is a graph that the system simply maintains all the time for all your projects. You can look at this graph for 1 project, 2 projects, a customer, all projects rolled up together, or just a task within a project. And every part of this graph is clickable. If I want to drill down on this gold bar to see the actuals, I can do that. If I want to drill, yes. If I want to drill down on another part of that graph and see a data point somewhere, like a cumulative plan, I can do that. And see, this happens to be a bunch of different customers and different projects all rolled together. This is for an organization. This system is designed to have all of the data in one place. Unlike a lot of software systems where all the timesheets are in another system and you don't get to see any of the timesheets until the end of the pay period, this one you see time as it's entered. So literally through today, I can see a job status report that tells me exactly what the current period is through close of business yesterday. Now that kind of data obviously is only as good as your timesheet compliance, because if people don't put the timesheets in, I don't know what the actuals are, but the system also gives you the tools to manage that compliance and really make it work for you. In the people area of the system, there were some questions. I've been monitoring the questions as we went through this. And some of the questions were about what can people see? Can I give people the ability to see utilization or resources without seeing salaries? And the answer is a very strong yes. Let's look at Frank, controller here. That's who I'm logged in as. The roles that Frank has, Frank's a project manager, he's a resource assigner, he's a resource planner. If I don't make him a cost rate manager, if I take that role away, then Frank can still see the project stuff, but he can't see any cost by person. Now in the people area, that lets Frank manage people and look at utilization. Here's a little display of utilization looking at people by organization. And you can see from the red bar here, I've got a little problem with Eleanor. Eleanor's somewhat overextended. She's 125% utilized, but I've got Carmine up here that's only 46%. This kind of data in a lot of systems would take days of extraction and analysis just to figure out who's well utilized and who it's not. In Unanet, it's literally the click of a button. And if I want to change how those criteria are displayed, I can go change it. In fact, I can do this kind of resource analysis as a percentage. I can do it in FTEs. I can do it in hours, just by saying how I want to see this data. In this organization, I've got one guy that's superhuman. He's 195% utilized, but down here, David is only 20%. And it is as easy as bringing up a user and seeing what projects David's working on to see where his utilization is. And in fact, Clark here, that's 195% utilized, I can see what projects Clark's working on. And now I can go assign, maybe take one of these off his plate and assign David to it. In our system, we give people the ability to literally design their own cost reports. So we can create cost reports here designed to make them look the way you want them to look, the way the PMO says is most useful. And then I can publish those reports and make them available across the organization. We can save shared reports that are already defined and ready for people to run with the click of a button. Like, here's my 2018 budget. Come on. There we go. And this is real-time data. In fact, here I'm looking at the budget across 12 months in this case. I can look at that same data. Oh, I'm sorry. Clicked the wrong home. I can look at that same data in terms of actuals and plans. And now I'm looking at, here's January. This is part actuals and part plans, and the rest of the display is all plans. I had somebody ask me the other day, well, what's the difference in a budget and a plan? And of course, the answer is, what do you want it to be? But normally, the budget is something that's has a baseline, it's controlled, but the plan is what I'm really going to do. And that might change from day to day, especially in Unanet, where I can literally see things from day to day. In fact, I might change a plan just to substitute Carmine for David, or Caroline for Sam, or Sam for Susie, just because I need change of skill sets. Might not change my cost at all, but it certainly changes my plan. And I wish I had another hour to talk to you about all the things that we can do, but the number one point I'd like people to take away is that this is one database, one security model, one technology stack, and one login to see whatever I choose to give someone access to. And in this case, if I choose to give someone access to a role, it doesn't cost any more, because when you license Unanet, you license the whole software suite. So whether it's a graph or a resource allocation grid or a project viewer role to bring along a junior project manager and train them in the discipline, you never have a financial disincentive to make this tool available to people, because it doesn't cost any more to have 5 project managers than it does to have 2 project managers. It doesn't cost any more to have 10 junior project managers than it does to have none. And that's kind of unique in this software world. I wish I had more time, but I'm going to give it back to you, Kim, unless you have something else you'd like to lead me to address.
Yeah, I think, gosh, I have a lot I'd love for you to address, but I think we've run out of time. I just want to make sure, and I misspelled Rich's name, but it's Rich Wilkinson. You can contact us. I had the contact up slide, but it's R. Wilkinson at unanet.com or K. Coster at unanet.com. We'd be happy to talk to you. And as you can tell, we both love to talk about government contracting and project management and project-based ERP. So hopefully we'll hear from you soon, and thanks for joining us.